Okay, colleagues, we're going to get started. Panelists, if you could please turn on your cameras. This is the Baltimore City Council Ways and Means Committee. We are here today for budget oversight hearings for second quarter of fiscal year 2022. We have the Bureau of Budget and Management Research, BBMR, as well as Baltimore City Public Schools. We're going to start off with BBMR. Amara Costello, Councilman from the 11th District, Chair of the committee. I'm joined by the following committee members: Vice President Sharon Green Middleton, 6th District, Councilman Isaac Yitzi Schleifer, 5th District, Councilman Robert Stokes, 12th District, Councilwoman Danielle McCrae, 2nd District, Councilman Ryan Dorsey, 3rd District, Councilman Chris Burnett, 8th District. Also joining us is Councilwoman Odette Ramos, 14th District. On behalf of Mayor Brandon Scott is Nina Themlis and Sophia Gabriello. I apologize if I did not pronounce that correctly. Joining us on behalf of Council President Nick Mosby is Nikki Thompson, and staff to the committee is Marguerite Curran. Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you. Councilman Stokes is going to be stepping in for me and chairing the beginning of the hearing. So we will do a BBMR presentation, questions from the committee, then we will jump over to Baltimore City Public Schools and then take questions from the committee. Bob, please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Councilman, and good morning, everybody. My name is Bob Senemy, Budget Director, representing Department of Finance, and today we're going to be presenting the fiscal 22 second quarter projection. Let me go ahead and share my PowerPoint and let me know when folks can see it, and then we'll get started. Can folks see the PowerPoint?
All set.
Okay. So, agenda for today, what we'd like to cover is first to give you a brief update on federal aid and how the interplay between that aid and this forecast. Next, we'll talk about the overall second quarter projection, and then we'll go into detail, a little bit more detail on both the revenue side and the expenditure side, and then we'll wrap up with a couple final comments. So first, just to touch on federal aid for fiscal 22, what we have going on here. So if you remember, we have two sources of federal aid. The third, ARPA, I'm ignoring for our purposes today, only because those funds are all being managed separately and don't, at least not yet, don't interact in any way with the general fund. But on CARES dollars and FEMA dollars, just a quick update for folks. So we got a direct award from CARES of $103 million. The deadline to spend that money was last December, end of December of calendar year 2021. So that deadline is passed. We spent all of the funds at that point. There's no more items in the budget going forward that will be paid for by that source of funds. And at this point, in terms of the process, we're just really wrapping up our documentation and doing our reporting to the federal government. But again, no more expenses will be charged to CARES as of January. And on the FEMA side, we are still receiving reimbursement for certain emergency protective measures that we've been taking. So this is now going into the third year where we've been getting FEMA aid. Usually there's a 25% match required for cities, but during this emergency, there's no match required. So we're getting 100% reimbursement for, again, certain things that are eligible, things like our sheltering program, food distribution, and some of our health protective measures, vaccinations in relation to COVID-19. What's been happening here is that FEMA has been extending the deadline periodically. And so far in fiscal 2022, they've done it 3 times. So it was extended to September of 2021, then to December of 2021, and now to the end of March or April 1st of 2022. So we have 3 quarters now that we know will be fully reimbursed, and not sure when those measures will end. So you'll see later in the presentation that we have some overspending in the health department, but we expect those funds to be reimbursed, most if not all of those funds to be reimbursed by FEMA. So to jump into the second quarter projection, mostly really good news here, what we'll be sharing. So for quarter two, we are showing an overall operating surplus in the general fund of $73.2 million. That's improved by $13 million from the first quarter projection that we shared a few months ago. That is made up of $90.6 million of revenue surplus and $17.4 million expenditure deficit. Again, on the deficit side, we think most of that will be recovered by FEMA aid. And so again, an overall operating surplus of $73.2 million. This is a projection based on data through December. So this is not where we are at December. This is based on data through December, and then we're projecting for where we'll end up through the rest of the fiscal year. And I want to jump right into the revenue detail because there's a pretty interesting story to tell on that side of our budget. Overall, the revenue is projected about $2.1 billion. Again, 90.6 million better than what we budgeted. It's a little bit, about 1% better than what we forecast at the first quarter projection. And most of the surplus can be attributed to income tax and transfer and recordation tax. And I want to spend a little bit more time going into detail on especially the transfer and recordation tax sources. So if you look at our chart here, you can see it looks like an extraordinary surplus in this source. And I want to go talk a little bit more about why that is. So for perspective, transfer and recordation taxes are driven by activity in the housing market. And if you remember last year, we had receipts of about $97 million in fiscal 2021. That was the highest level of transfer and recordation receipts we had seen in 14 years. So we had to go all the way back to fiscal 2007 to see receipts that were that high in transfer and recordation. In fiscal 2022, we're expecting over a 30% increase, even versus that 2021 level. So we're seeing just extraordinary activity in the housing market, a lot of transactions being posted. Looking at the real estate data, calendar 2021 was significantly better than calendar 2020. And for us, July through December of calendar 2021, of course, falls into our fiscal 22. So some of the improvement in this source that we saw at the end of fiscal 2021 has just continued into 2022. Calendar 21 saw 19.4% more transactions and 17.4% higher price average on sales than calendar year 2020, just for perspective. So we're up on both the number of transactions and the average price. And we get some real estate data that we look at. The team at Live Baltimore here provides some analysis for us. And when we look, we get a report every month from July through December. All of those months were the best months that we had seen in over 10 years. So December of 2021 was the best that we had seen since December of 2010. Same with November and October, September, and going back to July. So we've seen consistently these have been by far the best-selling months. One additional piece of detail, when we looked at our transfer tax transactions this year, last year through January, we had posted 7,300 transfer tax transactions. This year through January, we have over 12,000 transfer tax transactions. So again, volume.
Mr. Cinnamon, Mr.
Yes.
Cinnamon,
Yes.
did you, your PowerPoint presentation is showing gray. Is that how you wanted to show right now?
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me pull.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. Excuse me. And so, all of that is leading up to the fact that we have an extraordinary surplus in that source, estimated $46.4 million above budget for transfer and recordation taxes combined. Now, you might be thinking, well, wait, we knew the market was strong last year. Why didn't we just budget for this? And, the reason is, that we are very careful that we don't use extraordinary receipts and transfer and recordation taxes to support the operating budget. And because this source is so volatile, like we're seeing here, where we have a significant spike, we don't want to be relying on that revenue for our operating budget. So We do intentionally budget conservatively for this. We use a 5-year moving average. So even last year, when we were starting to see some improvement, that only factored in a little bit to our budget for fiscal 22. That protects us on the downside, but then if we do have extraordinary receipts like this, our policy is that we want to quickly put those towards, one-time expenses. And so our intent is to use some of this surplus and actually budget for it in fiscal 2023 for additional capital projects. And so you'll see that soon when the 2023 budget gets
Hey,
released.
Bob, real quick, I don't know if everybody else seen it, but part of your presentation is actually still showing a gray box. Is that supposed to be like it also?
No, sorry about that. Let me
Yeah,
just
see,
go back.
it's starting to leave. It's just moving all over the place now.
I'm sorry, I'm on two screens, so let me try to hide. Let me see if this works. Can you see now the presentation?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. So the next source is income taxes. So income taxes we're projecting at $27.1 million beyond the fiscal 2022 budget. And the story here is that last year there was a bill passed at the state level called the Maryland Relief Act, and that bill exempted unemployment payments. So for folks that were out of work and receiving unemployment, that bill exempted those receipts from federal and state tax. And so, DLS did an analysis on that and showing that that was going to cost local jurisdictions some amount of revenue in their income tax receipts. And the estimate for Baltimore was about $20 million. And we had factored that into our projection. And we just haven't seen that materialize yet. We're not sure why. For folks that were able to exempt those payments from tax, they can claim that on their 2020 and their 2021 tax returns. And of course, 2021 tax returns are not due until April of this year. So far, we just haven't seen that hurt materialize. We might see something different when some of those returns do finally get posted, either at the end of fiscal 2022 or even into fiscal 2023. So that's why we're seeing a big surplus in income tax. On camera violations, we're projecting an $8.3 million surplus versus the budget. And what we're seeing here is that we have speed camera and red light violation cameras. And for both of those, we've seen a pretty steady decline in the number of citations that we issue on a monthly basis per camera. So, just for perspective, on speed cameras specifically, right now we're issuing about 240 citations per month per camera. And if you do the math, that really equates to maybe about 10 or so per day. It's really not that much. You kind of go back even further, that's maybe about 1 per hour at locations. And just for perspective, in the beginning of the program, when we opened up the speed camera program, we were issuing citations at about 4 or 5 times that rate. So in the early stages, a lot of citations, a lot of people blowing through those. The behavior has changed, and now we've seen those receipts or the citations issued come down significantly. What is driving the surplus this year is that we are continuing to add more camera locations, and we hadn't factored all of that into the budget. So, DOT is continually looking at locations and either replacing existing cameras or just adding new locations. And, when this program started, we had aimed for 100 of each type, 100 traffic speed cameras and 100 red light cameras. We expect to be by the end of the year at 148 and 144 respectively in terms of location. So, the citations that we're issuing are coming down per camera, but we still are adding locations, which is driving that small surplus in that program. So on hotel tax, the next item in surplus. So hotel tax is another good story for us. If you remember last year, we only brought in about $10 million in net hotel tax receipts in fiscal 2021. In a normal year, pre-COVID, we were generating 30 million plus of hotel tax on an annual basis. We had budgeted for an improvement in hotel tax in fiscal 2022, but the progress has been even better than we expected. our projection is to bring in $26 million of hotel tax revenue, which is $6.4 million better than budget. And when we looked at the data, what's happening is last year, because of COVID and because there were fewer people traveling, the average hotel rate that hotels were offering for customers was way down. So they were providing deep discounts to try to get people in the door. So we had kind of the double whammy of we had very low occupancy rates and the prices on hotel rooms had come way down. On average, it was only about $100 in fiscal 21 was the average room rate, and we had at the low point, we were seeing rates as low as $70 for a room, which is really low for a big metropolitan area on the East Coast. And this year, we're projecting an average daily room rate of $125 per room, and the occupancy is back up to what looks like about 80% of pre-pandemic levels, which for us is looking at fiscal 2019. So good news here is that, it looks like the recovery is happening. It's going a little bit quicker than even we had expected in the budget. Now, one thing to note is that we haven't yet seen any impact from the Omicron variant. So that was really, wreaking havoc in, late December around the holidays and into January. We haven't seen final January data yet for hotel tax. So we anticipate there might be a small impact. But again, we think it's more of a disruption rather than stopping kind of a more midterm, long-term overall recovery, which seems well underway at this point. In terms of deficits on the revenue side, just two items to note, two small ones. On towing fees, we're down $2.3 million versus the expected budget. And the reason for this is that we had stopped towing as a city. The city overall had stopped towing, and that was not reintroduced until part of the way through fiscal 2022. So we're $2.3 million below what we'd usually bring in for towing fees because, again, we had stopped that service and only restarted it when we were already in fiscal 2022. And finally, on property taxes, we're showing a $2.7 million deficit versus budget. This is, again, really small in a, we have an over $900 million real property tax line in our budget. $2.7 million is less than a fraction of 1% of that. What we're seeing so far is that we had made an assumption for some new construction. We're just lagging a little bit behind what we had expected to see added during this year in terms of new construction. But again, we're not seeing anything alarming there. We're pretty close, well within a normal margin of error for that revenue source. So that's just the big items that are either $1 million above or below budget on the revenue side. So turning to expenditures. On the expenditure side, our spending is projected to total a little bit over $2 billion. This is very close to the fiscal 21 levels, actually just a tad below our 21 levels, and that's because we had more spending on COVID in fiscal 21. It's $17.4 million more than what was budgeted. That's a deficit of less than 1% on the expenditure side, and as we'll see momentarily, a lot of that is coming from the health department. When we look at individual agencies in terms of which ones are in surplus or deficit, one pattern that we are seeing that's a little unusual this time around is that we have a lot of vacant positions in some of our key agencies. And so, some of that we can, chalk up to just normal routine attrition. No large agency ever has every single position filled. But we also think that some of this, nationwide worker shortage is impacting our government just like it is other governments and other companies throughout the country. And so, we usually have, positions vacant in some of our big agencies, but it's larger than normal. And I want to show you the three where it's hitting us especially hard. So, and again, this is a help to the city, to our budget. This is surplus that we'll have, but we are not in a position right now where we're freezing any positions. We did that during the early stages of COVID-19, but we are not stopping any agencies from hiring right now. Agencies are going full speed ahead trying to fill these positions, but it has been a struggle to fill some of these frontline positions. So, library, rec and parks, and transportation were the agencies with large expenditure surpluses. Just for some additional data, library has 351 positions in the general fund, and 57 of those are vacant as of January 1st. Rec and Parks has 349 general fund positions, 55 are vacant right now, and DOT has 1,112 positions, of which 212 of those are vacant. So, I mean, those are vacancy rates at 15 to 20%, which is really extraordinary. Again, we usually see an 8, 10, even a 12% vacancy rate in some of our agencies, but this is beyond what we're used to. So that's why you're seeing significant surpluses in those agencies. On the deficit side, there are 4 agencies that we're projecting to end the year in deficit. And again, we'll provide updates on this at the third quarter and at closeout, but I wanted to make folks aware of these 4 that will likely end in deficit for the year. So the first one is the Labor Commissioner's Office. So what happened in 22 so far is that we budget for legal fee expenses for using private attorneys to help us with our negotiations with labor unions. And that money is budgeted in the Labor Commissioner's budget. This year, we had all of our contracts being negotiated at the same time. So we were working on the fire officers, the firefighters. We were working on FOP for police. We've been working on ASME and CUB and MAP. So basically all of our key bargaining units were negotiating at the same time. So this is really not the fault of the labor commissioner. This is a kind of an intentional choice we made to kind of spend beyond so that we could get the support we needed to try to wrap up those contract negotiations. And again, we're usually on a cycle where 1 or 2 will come up in a year, but the circumstances this year is that we were renegotiating agreements for all of our large bargaining agreements during fiscal 2022. The health department, that second item, $46.1 million. So this again is driven by our response to COVID-19. We did not expect the FEMA program to last this long into fiscal 2022. And as I told you earlier, it's been extended through the end of March 2022. So the deficit here was largely spending on sheltering and food distribution and other COVID-19 related expenses that we believe will ultimately be reimbursed by FEMA. So this variance here is not going to require a drawdown from our reserves. The third item is the Convention Center Hotel. So as I think I've shared with the committee before, the city is required to make certain payments, additional payments to the Convention Center Hotel if they are falling short of their projections. And since the Convention Center Hotel was closed and has had slower business, like many of our other hotels during COVID-19, they have not had the resources available from operations to be able to make all of the required payments that they have, such as taxes, debt service payments, and administrative fees. So we have provided $4 million more above budget of support to the hotel. We are working with the ARPA team. We think some of these expenses might be able to be covered by ARPA, but we don't have a final decision on that quite yet. So we're showing this as a deficit in the general fund. And then finally, the fire department, we're showing a $4 million deficit. If you remember, we had made a decision in the 21 budget to disband 2 fire companies. We ended up not doing that in 21. We decided not to do that again in 22 while we waited for the results of an operational study that was being done on the fire department. So we had budgeted for having 2 additional units close, which we did not do, and that's really making up most of that deficit in the fire department. We're going to make a decision either way on staffing and fire and reflect that correctly in the fiscal 2023 budget. So to summarize, I would say, as of the second quarter, compared to where we were sitting a year ago, we are in much better shape. I would say our financial status right now is pretty strong. An overall operational surplus of $73 million in the general fund is a much better place to be than a year ago when we were expecting to end the year in a deficit position in the general fund because of COVID-19. Due to the one-time nature of that large surplus in transfer and recordation taxes, we do plan to devote some of that surplus to capital spending, and you'll see that in the 2023 budget. we will be able to devote more to capital spending in the 2023 budget than normal because of this, extraordinary surplus in transfer and recreation taxes. Third point is that we really haven't seen an impact of Omicron yet in our financials. Again, a lot of that was late December, early January. So we'll report, when we come back for our third quarter projection, we will report further, if we saw any impact in January data or beyond. But our instinct is we won't see much impact. And then the overspending, which is less than 1% of the budget, all of that is isolated to programs that are related to our ongoing response to COVID-19, which is continuing, especially in some of those health department programs. So that is the end of our formal remarks. And as always, I'm happy to hear questions from the committee members. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I just want to recognize Councilman Conway from the 4th District. Before we start, I just want to, each council person, committee person will get 2 questions to ask. And if you have any requests, please do that also so we don't prolong this oversight hearing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get started, because my mother always taught me, ladies are first. So I'm gonna start off with Vice President of the City Council, Sharon Green Middleton. See if she have any questions.
No questions.
Thank you, Councilwoman Danielle McCray. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Questions? This is great. Councilman Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bob, how many of these vacancies at DOT and Rec and Parks are due to them being frozen or having been frozen? Can you explain, like, if they've been unfrozen, are we just seeing that the listing and hiring process has not even had enough time to unfold yet, or what's going on there? Can you give us some better insight?
Yeah, I think I think that was probably an impact early in fiscal 2022. I don't think that is a reason anymore. So we had a freeze in place during fiscal 21. And, the reason for that is, again, we were, scrambling to make sure that we could end the year in balance. And I should say that even when we had a freeze in place for city agencies were allowed to request exceptions to that, and many agencies did and got approval to do that. So like a frontline agency like, DOT or the police department or others that have people that are interacting with the public directly, we were granting exceptions. We sent the message to agencies. We said, hey, we've got to be tight on our spending this year, but for frontline employees, we were granting exceptions to that. So I think at this point, now that we're 6 to 7 months into fiscal 2022, I don't think that there's much lingering impact from that hiring freeze. I think more now what we're seeing is that we're kind of suffering from what a lot of governments or companies are, just the struggle in hiring frontline employees. They're kind of talking about there's this nationwide worker shortage in a lot of industries, and I think some of that is just spilling over, into municipal governments. I would say, one other thing to add is that, when an agency has that level of surplus, we have encouraged agencies to think about, would they be willing to increase salaries for some of those positions to be able to recruit more positions, if they're willing to forego some of those FTEs. So, if you have 200 vacancies, I would rather have fewer staff and pay them more so that we can recruit and retain those employees, rather than have a bunch of pins that you can't use. So we have been working with agencies and encouraging them to do that. That does take a lot of analysis and thought. Some of those agencies are working with HR, trying to figure out, where do we have hard to fill positions, and can we be more aggressive on salaries? You might have remembered there was a story in the news a few weeks ago. The state's attorney chose to do that. So they chose to forego a couple of vacant positions and redevote some of that money into higher salaries for their attorney positions. And we're encouraging other agencies to do the same thing. Actually just had a discussion a couple of days ago with the health department on the school nurse side, where they have a bunch of vacancies, but they have room to kind of redevote some of those savings into higher salary. So we're trying to do that where we can. And I think that's where we're leaning now because again, there's a lot of pressure on wages because of the worker shortage. And again, this is not something we're just seeing in government. You're seeing this in a lot of industries throughout, throughout the country.
So while we're encouraging those, thanks, Bob. I mean, that sounds great to me. I think we should be paying people more. That's and that to me is the key to the labor shortage. We don't have a labor shortage. We have a willingness to pay shortage. And that's not just us, that's across the country. So we should be paying people more, and that's good. Um, at the same time, are we also that we're encouraging agencies to figure out how to do that? Are we also encouraging them maybe to consider what position, like uh, change of positions or focus where they might be? I'm thinking in particular. Um, First of all, right now we're at like 3 people doing all of the maintenance for all of the Clifton division of Rec and Parks when there should be 6. So we need, there's clearly some need for people in certain positions, and it is affecting service delivery in the city for sure. But we also had a hearing last week that Councilwoman Ramos called that dealt a lot with right-of-way division and right-of-way matters at DOT. We learned that DOT only has, I looked at the budget books afterwards, the right-of-way division has only 1 right-of-way inspector, and only 3 exist in the maintenance division. 4 exist in the maintenance division. That's 3 regular and 1 supervisor. And that's to inspect all of the street cuts in the whole city. 20,000, 22,000 a year. And they're just doing an inadequate job. They don't have the positions. Are we also encouraging them to like move some of this available resources into positions that may not already exist, creating new pins or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, if that's something that an agency can do. If I suspect that in some of those agencies that I referenced, there might be some pins that maybe haven't been filled for a long time and might, have been not as necessary or might have been phased out because of either better technology or better, management or work products. So we do, agencies are allowed to swap positions and, add some into their budget and offset with other savings in their budget. So we do offer that. It's something that I would say we encourage, but, it takes some action from the agency to kind of think through that and to work with, finance and HR to find a solution for that. But, cost neutral changes we encourage and allow for at any point in the process, even during the year. So.
Great, thanks. And the other thing I want to ask about is, you.
Councilman, before you go, is that a request? And I think this is your second question. Is that a request
No,
that you might
that
want?
that helps get me some clarification that I think I can take back to the agencies directly. The other thing I want to ask about is towing. You mentioned how we had stopped towing for a while, and so towing revenues was down. But it's also the case that we are facing a persistently overcrowded tow yard, and so we're not towing simply because we don't have anywhere to put the vehicles. And this is this is taking a toll on our inboxes for sure, because these cars, and Councilman Burnett can attest to this, that there some of them are on the street so long that people are stripping them for parts just being left there. And this is happening all over the city, and it's kind of hideous. And we just can't address it because of capacity. Um, is there? We did a study last year, um, recommending a whole new system for dispatch that would also include a way of managing our towing inventory. Are we moving toward that new technology and that new system to contract to do a new system so that we can rectify these ongoing towing problems that are not only having this kind of community-based impact, but obviously also having a budgetary impact?
Yeah, I don't know offhand. I would have to check in with DOT. I mean, I know they have shared with us, some of the issues with storage at the yard and trying to free up, space and capacity. But on the technology, I'm not sure. I'd have to check in with DOT on that one.
All right, yeah, I think we really need to do something about this. I, basically we've been facing capacity issues for as long as I've been in office now, even long before COVID. We're just like constantly overcrowding the yard. And if we ever get any vehicles off the yard, it's short-lived because, it's a short-lived opening because it's just immediately backfilling in with all the volumes and volumes of cars that we've been delaying picking up off the street because we didn't have the space. Um, so we really need to do something about that. Yeah, I'll be following up about that shortly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Burnett?
Thank you, Chair Stokes. So piggybacking off of the line of questions around what we're doing on the shortage of folks applying for work here, um, are you, aside from looking at pay increase, which I think I would second, are you looking at other ways to attract workers? I know some employers are looking at different types of options as far as like shorter work weeks or virtual or just other ways to sort of make it. And then obviously this is in the context of the fact that a lot of people are still their children may be on and off from school due to COVID or other reasons. Are we looking at other sort of innovative ways to sort of meet where the things that people are looking for in this new emerging economy?
Yeah, I would need to check in with HR on that one on some of those options. I have not heard any discussion of a shorter work week. I don't think that's under consideration. On the virtual, I mean, we're still obviously in a largely virtual environment. I think, as we've been hiring new folks, we've told them that is a possibility to kind of stay in that environment. Maybe not permanently forever, but for certainly a prolonged period of time. Most of kind of MAPS employees or professional employees are working for virtually at this point, and many others are too. So I think that's part of the recruitment strategy that we say, yeah, we're not going to and we've even hired some people recently that have asked, am I going to have to be in the office? And the answer is really no, very likely no, at least for the short term and medium term, because we have this virtual environment. In terms of those other things that you mentioned, I don't know. I need to check in with HR if they're thinking of those items. But I did want to mention on the pay, HR has been doing and does do as part of our labor negotiations process. They do a certain number of salary studies any given year for certain classes that we identify as hard to fill. So we're actually having those conversations right now. If there's kind of classes across the citywide that we need to kind of make a move on salaries. And then, as I mentioned in the presentation, we encourage agencies to do that individually if they have a classifications that's just specific to their agency. To look at ways, is it possible to have higher pay and fewer workers, and can we get more work done that way? And that's something that we would certainly encourage. But HR does look at the salaries on a global citywide basis to see where we have outages, and then we talk about that in part of our budget development process to see if we can afford some of that, and add some money into the budget for certain classes where we need additional resources.
Okay. I mentioned the work week mainly because I know that other government and a lot of other entities are looking at productivity levels and sort of showing that the 40-hour work week versus less it doesn't necessarily impact productivity, and so I would look at see what other folks are doing as another way to attract folks. And I'm not just dying on that hill of a shorter work week, but just other tools that are out there. But I do know that folks are making those kind of considerations and just more of a focus on how productive people are, not necessarily are they coming to work every day into a building and we're watching them sort of stare off into the abyss when we know that folks are only really productive for maybe 4 or 5 hours a day and not necessarily in a full 8-hour day is sort of what the research is showing. On the other question I had, and obviously this isn't the hearing, for this necessarily, but related. I know that the administration just announced a deeper look into our response to vacancy and blight. Has there been, obviously you're early in this process, but are considerations being made to increase DHCD's capacity to conduct inspections of vacant properties? Those follow-up inspections can go uninspected for long periods of time. And my understanding isn't so much of the work ethic of the inspectors that we do have. I think, largely they do a great job, but their capacity challenges and limitations to how much follow-up they are able to do at their current capacity levels. Can you speak to efforts to increase inspections of vacant properties and any other things that we should be looking forward to or that are being considered to address this problem?
Yeah, so it's probably a bit early because as I think you saw, the mayor, made a directive for agencies that are involved in any way, a variety of agencies involved in any way to kind of, dig in, try to figure out what we're doing now, what we can do better. So I haven't seen any results of that. I think he gave, 30 days to do that. So I haven't seen the results of that. I was part of that conversation, and we're looking at that ourselves in our department, just understanding what things we fund in the budget, and if there's any changes we can make. But I think I'd prefer to see everything come back, and I'm sure we'll be responding to kind of what we plan to do differently shortly. But it's a little bit premature at the moment because that just happened just a couple weeks ago.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Slinger.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Real quick, before we go with Councilman Odette Ramos, I wanted to apologize if I started off with the committee members first, so I don't want anybody to think I deliberately skipped over. I just have a question for you, Bob. I was watching your budget on certain agencies that have vacancies, and I've been talking to you about rec and parks, and it's a little troubling that rec and parks have 55 positions that's open, and we don't even have enough money when the rec center's open that the kids can't even go out of the neighborhood to a bus trip somewhere. So I know I had mentioned this to you before, but I think we need to go back and revisit that, I guess, once those positions are filled or not. Are we going to look at adding more money to these rec centers so these young people, when they're inside of that rec center, when the weather break, they have an opportunity to go other places outside the setting or the environment they live in or the environment they're around? Because the way the rec and parks budget set up, their money is only for salaries. They have no money to take our young people nowhere outside of the community. And we just did it last year. We at Cecil Elementary School, the kids did so wonderful at Cecil. The camp that we got Midway to pay for a trip to take the kids to reward them for a great camp that they had. So my question is, and I'll go back and come back and see you, but we need to look at put more money into these rec centers so our young people have an opportunity to be going to different activities outside of the rec center. Right now, rec and parks money is only in salaries. So have y'all looked at it also?
Yeah, so I think I think it's a good point. I think even now with a number of positions vacant, the question is, could some of the positions that are sitting there in the budget for positions that are not filled, could some of that be redirected to more programming? So that's something we'll definitely work with Rec and Parks on and talk to them about. I know they had shared that they were thinking more about programming in the rec centers and things that can be done in and outside of there. So I think there is some opportunity now with what we're seeing to potentially redirect some of that savings towards that. But I need to check in with Rec and Parks on that. I haven't spoken to them recently about that.
Okay, so real quick, I'm not. I have to talk to Mr. Moore about his 55 positions because we still need staffing in the rec center, so we don't need to take that money.
Right.
So we can use that for what I asked him for. So I'm just saying, until that 55 positions are filled, the budget should be now reflecting more money for programming at these rec centers. Because you can't open a rec center and you don't have no programming. Every kid don't want to play football. Every kid don't want to play basketball. What other opportunities we have for young people? Right now, all we have is salaries. Don't make sense. So that's just I wanted to share with you. And that's my question, and I'm gonna step over to,
Chairman Stokes. Chairman Stokes, this is Sharon Middleton. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties, but can I just kind of piggyback on something you just talked about?
sure.
And this is just more to you had mentioned more about youth, and I just want to include expansion of services for older adults. And Bob, have you know, through COVID, I know that CARES through the health department has, you know, been doing work with food access and, you know, just a number of things through getting those free rapid tests and COVID shots in senior buildings and so on. But it's, again, this is bringing out that we really need some more direct services with our older adult population and really get a little more specific. We can't just continue to do the same thing we have been doing with our older adults. We have a very large population of older adults in this city, and I'm feeling, you know, we have a few partners, of course, the Maryland Food Bank and name it, but we need money to expand care and those services. It's right in front of our eyes. Could you respond to that, please?
Well, I think I need to check in with the health department to understand that in a little bit more detail in terms of what they do currently and what if there's anything they're thinking of changing or adding. So I can check in with health on that. I'm not intimately familiar with those programs.
Thank you. It's just so very important at this time because all of us in our districts, we get constant feedback. There needs to be help in communities for our older adults, and that neglect is showing. Thank you. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Chairman Stokes.
No problem. Real quick, since Council Vice President brought that up, at one time there was a cabinet position to deal with senior programming. For some reason, it got swallowed up in the health department. So my request is, how do we now create that cabinet position to talk about senior programming? Because as soon as that position was removed, the senior program looked like it's somewhere hiding. Don't nobody know what senior programming is, or is there any senior program? So Bob, to you and to Marguerite, can we go back and look at that request for that cabinet position dealing with senior programs throughout the city? I know Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark, we've been talking about that for a while, but I think that's something we need to go revisit because a lot of times, a lot of communities don't even know there's senior programming in the city because it's hitting over in the health department. So, Marguerite, can we put in a request to talk about that cabinet position for our seniors and for senior programming throughout the city?
Will do, sir.
Thank you. Councilwoman Odette Ramos, your two questions are.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and colleagues. Mr. Seneme, well, first, I was going to ask you a question about revenues or ideas for addressing vacant properties, but you answered that earlier with Councilman Burnett's question. I mean, I do think one of the things we need to do is think about creatively financing some of the work that needs to be done, and that might be expanding our bonding capacity. And I'm sure we're going to take a look at that during this phase. So just sort of keeping that in the back of your mind. My question related to sort of is, I was really happy to see that transfer and recordation has increased significantly. May we please get the balance now for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, since the trust fund is funded on an additional tax on the transfer and recordation for transactions above $1 million. That would be great to get that, and I guess that would be a formal request.
Sure.
I think the last fiscal year, it was like 8 million or something like that, but I would imagine it's going to be a lot more.
Yes, yeah, we get a report from our revenue collections division about how many transactions exceeded that 1 million, how many they recorded. So we can, we can have our team send that over the most current data.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And secondly, I just wanted to be clear, the health department deficit that you have outlined, that does include the hotels where our folks who are experiencing homelessness are, and it's through that program that we're getting reimbursed from FEMA. I just want to make sure we're not losing that important piece when we're talking about reimbursements.
Yeah, that's correct. We chose to charge all that stuff to the health department since they're leading the COVID-19 response. But yeah, the deficit in health, a large portion of that is the sheltering costs via the hotel. So that's a big chunk of what's in there.
Okay, that's great, and hopefully they'll extend the deadline again, but we'll
Yeah,
see.
the longer the better, but we are starting to try to, brace ourselves and prepare for what comes next, because it's if that funding does expire, we're going to have to figure out what to do with that population and quickly. So we are working with homeless services on trying to figure out a plan for what to do when that funding expires.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I do have another question, but I'll wait for the next round. Thanks.
Why don't you go ahead? I don't know if it's gonna be no next round. That's why I'm asking, because we got another oversight. I mean, hearing that with the school board budget after this.
Sure.
So we got another question. Just go ahead.
Thank you. It should be pretty short. Mr. Seneme, have we done an analysis, or I didn't see it in your slides, about the property tax or revenue projections versus what we are leaving behind because, and I don't know if that's the right way to say it, because of our property tax credits? Do we know how much revenue we're having to go away because we are allowing for these tax credits and TIFs and all of that?
Yeah, so the forecast that we showed you there, it's net of all the credits. So it's everything combined. So we have like one line in the budget. If you look at our revenue summary on our budget book for 22, we show kind of gross property tax revenues, and then we show a bunch of deductions for all of the credits we offer. And as I've shared with the team and discussed with many here, we have done some deeper analysis on some of those tax credits. We had Ernst & Young help us with that analysis, and we have a report that's close to being in final form that we're eager to share, because I think there are some areas that can certainly be improved in terms of what we're offering, who we're targeting, and where those credits are distributed. But for purposes of this, it's everything is net in that forecast for property tax. That includes the deductions for the credits.
So when you had that 2 million deficit in that one particular chart, that had included the credits.
That's right.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Conway, you have questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've just got one question, and you may not be able to answer it, but I think
Before you start real quick, I just want to mention that Councilman Slifer was on another call. He did say he didn't have any questions, so I want to put that on for the record. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Director Seneme, my question, you may not have an answer to it now, but I'm curious if we think about this, or if there is a way to think about.
Councilman Conway? I think he dropped off. Let's give him a couple minutes. I think his internet is not working.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, you're back. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm
We
back.
didn't hear you, so if you could start back over. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I got booted for a second. So, yes, Director Senemy, my question was, have we explored at all whether we assume additional cost or never realize certain revenues by not filling positions? Is that something that we can look into or better identify?
We do. I mean, we've never, our policy has been if, even when we have like a really bad fiscal situation like we did in 2021, if there are, if there are positions that generate revenue like housing code, enforcement folks or parking agents, enforcement agents, we've always allowed those positions to be filled. We've never frozen them. So we do take that into consideration. Even when we have kind of broader freezes where we're trying to save money on a short-term basis, we always exclude those to make sure we're not, being penny wise and pound foolish on those items. But, those types of positions, just like any others, those frontline positions are still, in some cases are a struggle to fill, even if we're allowing agencies to go full speed ahead to fill those positions.
Sure. I think what I'm curious about is whether or not we see, I'm sure we definitely see it, but an increase in overtime for certain positions. I know this is an issue with BPD, with its inability to fill its open positions. And
Yeah.
then also, I'm not sure about unrealized revenues, but if some other systems get gummed up because we don't have the staff to make sure city processes work well, we may not realize some revenues. But I'm just kind of curious if that's something that we have looked into, or if we are able to look into it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, we have looked at that again, like in context of if we ever have to give, like we did for a period of fiscal 21 guidance on being more cautious. We've identified the key revenue generating ones are the inspector positions, not just in housing, but there's other ones that issue fines. Housing just happens to have the most, and those parking control agents are the two big ones. I mean, there's others that are related to collecting revenue. So, like in revenue collections, it's not the enforcement of the action, but it's just having the staff to make sure we're processing everything that comes in. So, those three areas are the ones that are kind of most critical, I would say. And like I was telling Councilman Dorsey earlier, even when we have a freeze does not mean that across the board nobody can hire. We're making that's the intent of that is to kind of set the tone of like, hey, our revenues are coming in short. We need to be tight on expenses, but for frontline and in critical positions like the ones you're describing, we've always given waivers and let folks hire those positions with a quick approval from our office.
Awesome. Yeah, I know you guys are pretty thoughtful about it. Just kind of running my mind as I was thinking about the more texture to the to what we're reporting. But thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bob. Thank you for the presentation. We appreciate it. Just giving us an update on the city budget. We are going to now recess this particular oversight hearing, and in the next 5 minutes, we will move on to the school system budget. So 11:10 is when we're going to start back up on the school system budget also. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It is exactly 11:10 and go next to our next oversight hearing, which is the school board.
Well, good day, everyone.
How you doing, sir?
Fine, thanks.
Waiting for the rest of the committee to get on and we can start. And I believe Mr. Broom is on here. Alyssa?
Good morning.
How you doing? We'll go ahead and start. I'm sure everybody's back on. What I wanted to do is, before we start, is if you cannot, Melissa, I see you're here twice, so I don't know what that means, but I don't know who you can you introduce the people from the school board who is going to be on this call, and then we can proceed and go on into your presentation. After presentation, committee members will have questions concerning the budget.
Can you hear me, Councilman Stokes?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Melissa Sorry, I'm getting an echo.
Yeah, because you only hit twice.
Okay, there we go. Good morning. I'm Melissa Broom. I'm the Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs for the Baltimore City Public School System. And we are joined this morning by, I believe, Dewana Starrett is here representing the Board of School Commissioners. Our CFO, Chris Doherty, is here, and Courtney Desibay, Special Assistant to the CFO at City Schools. And I believe Courtney is going to be sharing slides from his screen momentarily. I think you're muted, Courtney.
Karen? Okay. Marguerite,
Hi, are you
Karen?
guys able to see the slides?
Not yet, Courtenay. We see the gray box that
Yeah.
gave Director Sinema a bit of trouble as well.
Okay, let me try to reshare.
I'm waiting for,
Okay.
I'm waiting to see if Marguerite is on here. Maybe she can give them sharing
It's the
rights.
Yes, I'm
exact
here,
same gray
Mr. Chair.
box.
Mr. Chair, I'm here, but I believe Mr. Courtenay has two computer screens. I think you need to put it on one. There you are. Okay. Go ahead. Do you have two computer screens?
There's two monitors, and it has
Yes,
the
two
screen shared,
monitors,
but
yes.
it's just short. Okay. You're not seeing any gray box. We're fine, right?
No,
Oh, gray
still
box
seeing a
is
gray
still
box.
there.
Still seeing it?
Yeah, we saw a
Yes.
glimpse of the other one.
Okay, let me try something else. Is that any better?
Yes, that's it. Clear as a bell.
Okay. Okay, and no gray box?
Gray box.
No gray box.
Okay. What's funny is that now it's kind of blocked off on my screen, but as long as you can see it, that's fine. So I'm Courtney Desibay, as Melissa mentioned, Special Assistant to the Chief Financial Officer and Acting Budget Director for City Schools. So I'm going to go through today's presentation. We're going to cover, really, it's about 3 slides. So we're going to go through the general fund revenue as of December 31st. We're going to go through the general fund expenditures by category, and then we're going to go through the general fund expenditures by object group. So the first, we're looking at the revenue by sources. So it breaks down our estimated revenue as of December 31st from our major sources. State of Maryland, $857 million. So that's about 71.8% of the total allocation. The City of Baltimore allocation as of December was $293,955. Our federal sources, interest earnings, other revenue, and other financing sources make up the remaining like 3.4%. Of the other revenue items in there, we have things like non-resident tuition, summer school tuition, miscellaneous revenue, et cetera. Federal sources includes items such as E-rate. So in terms of actual revenue to date, things are on pace, to where we expect. There are a couple items that you're not going to see actual revenue for yet. For example, the other financing sources, which we don't take out till the end of the year as needed. If you see the total, the 1192706, it's 10.4 million higher than what we had in our budget book at the start of the year due to the supplemental appropriation that was made for technology reasons. Our next slide goes through our expenditures, general fund expenditures expressed in thousands on a category basis. So it's broken down by our MSD categories. So here you can see the spending trends, so far 6 months through the year. There's nothing that we're seeing at this point that is of a particular concern with regards to spending. The largest, single category, of course, is instruction, where it's about 35% of our budget amount. And we're trending, just below 50% in terms of expenditures there. Special education is the one area where it's a little low for this point in the year. But, you know, that is not much different from what we saw last year, you know, during COVID. So that, again, is kind of trending in the direction that we expect. Everything else, again, is about where we would look at for this point in the year. Debt service is relatively low because we pay a lot of those payments annually. So it's just once per year, and some of those payments have not been made yet. That's why it's relatively low at this point. But everything else is on track, you know, with regards to how we expect to see those expenditures for 6 months into the year. So this slide shows the expenditures again, just broken down in a different way. So it's broken down by our object group. So the largest categories, of course, salaries and wages makes up 53.9% of our budgeted amount. And then fringe benefits, the second largest, which is tied, of course, to salaries, is 19.5%. Again, we're seeing, you know, expenditures trending as expected. They are a little bit low in terms of like halfway through the year, and we haven't expended, you know, 50%. And a lot of that, of course, is due to vacancies. But again, not anything abnormal, you know, for this time of the year. In terms of the rest of our spending, everything else is on track. Utilities and other charges includes, you know, some of our 21st century contributions. Our debt service, again, as I mentioned, it's paid annually. So that's why you're seeing, you know, lower expenditures, you know, for 6 months of the year, because some of that we don't pay until we get to the third and fourth quarter. And transfers mostly covers like a lot of our non-public expenditures, which, you know, the billing of that is quarterly. So we don't have the second quarter payments in yet for the transfers. So it's missing that portion of the payment. But again, there's nothing at this point that is causing any particular area of alarm or concern in terms of spending. There's nothing that's tracking to be overspent at this point. And we do anticipate having some level of surplus. We just need to understand exactly what it's going to look like based on some of the second quarter actuals that are still outstanding. But nothing of concern for us to this point in the year. And that's it. So I'll be happy to take any questions related to the presentation.
Thank you. Council Vice President, Councilwoman Middleton, do you have any questions?
I'll pass at this time. Thank you.
So Woman McCray?
No questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Burnett?
Yeah, I do. Again, I'm sure this is tentative, but can you speak to the recent cuts or lack of allocation to city schools from the current budget before the General Assembly? Can you give us a little bit more detail on where that stands, what the school system's position is, and I guess more importantly, the council has been, you know, advocating and joining, you know, voices in this. How can we be more supportive to ensure that city schools are fully funded by the state?
Thank you, Councilman Burnett. Courtenay, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
You can get started, Chief. I'll fill in any blanks if there are any.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Councilman Burnett. I can say we were taken by surprise by that, and we have frankly appreciated the support or the raising of that issue in various forums. We at Courtenay's and my level, we tend not to get involved in the political discussions of this, but since you raise it, I can confirm that from our level, we were kind of blindsided by it. And what I mean by that is those numbers through the educational effort calculation had been estimated and expected, and so it wasn't a pipe dream that we and Prince George's County were expecting amounts from that category, and then to have it at the last minute be taken away with an explanation that, as far as we know, is based on a reading of the calculation that says prior year data is needed, but prior to that last moment lack of funding that you're referencing, at the working level, there had been no discussion of this is contingent upon XYZ reading, or this is a maybe. So it was as big a surprise to us as it was, I think, to everyone else. And as you know, it's a significant amount of money, $99 million for FY23. That's a gigantic amount of money. And we at the working level were blindsided by it, because in the state's own estimates in various appendices that Courtney and I and others pour over to generate these kinds of reports, it was what we thought we were getting. So I know that's not a terribly satisfying answer, but we were blindsided. We appreciate the discussion that you and others, Chair Costello included, have raised, and we're interested in how it will be resolved, because so far from the state, it's just, as I said, their explanation has been that since that particular educational effort calculation requires prior year data on an index that's brand new. So the idea is that the index is brand new, which is one thing, but then it says we need to have 2 years of data in order to send the money or to come up with a contribution. That took us by surprise. There had been no previous discussions of that point. So, Courtney, anything at all to add to that lament?
No, I think you covered it. Yeah, the key point being that the way the calculation was derived is that it uses a current year education effort index, which uses your local share and a wealth calculation, and it compares that with the prior year, relative index. In this case, this being the first year of the formula, the reading of it is that there is no prior year for comparison. Therefore, there's no basis to make the change. So they didn't include an allocation amount, for that calculation.
And my next question on that is, so you mentioned that, you were caught off guard. Are there anticipated impacts? I guess, because you would often, project out that you would have that 99 million to be able to do things with. Are there concerning impacts if this issue isn't resolved on staffing or resources for our young people?
I'd say, sir, the short answer is yes. We're still we're still working with the state to determine what the final amounts will be. That even irrespective of the educational effort category, which is a big one, perhaps because of the newness of Kerwin and the new formulas, we don't have right now a final number. But yes, if it stands, the fact that $99 million less than what was expected was received, it absolutely would have an impact on what we would be able to do for our students. That said, we still are trying to get the rest of the information that we need, and possibly the educational effort part of it, but there's no way to nip and tuck your way around $99 million cut in expected funds.
Chris,
And
if I may, Councilman Burnett, it's a great question, and I just want to flag that it's not one that's been decided by any means in Annapolis. The Maryland General Assembly has a different interpretation of what the governor allocated in his budget, and they are very much they are in different places. They're awaiting an opinion from the Attorney General, who's going to weigh in on how last year's legislation was meant to be enacted this year. So it's only an issue for this coming year. In the out years, as Chris explained and Courtney explained, in the out years, it's taken care of. It's just for this next year ahead. And it was also discussed yesterday at the meeting of the newly established AIB, the Accountability and Implementation Board, established under the Kerwin legislation. So it's not, it's one that we're watching closely and will continue to watch, but advocacy in this area is going to be important this legislative session.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I just have a real quick, we'll go to the next councilman. Where can we see the supports for parents engagement and student re-engagement for those who have dropped out of school? I guess in other words, where are we showing the investments and outreach to parents and getting disengaged youth reconnected?
It's a good question. So we have our re-engagement center and our AOP program, which is run by, Dr. Shaw. They do a lot of outreach with regards to student re-engagement, parent re-engagement, especially in light of COVID-19 and the circumstances that we're in. And this is an ongoing thing, and it's an area of investment. And they're funded through our AOP, Alternative Option Program budgets. So that doesn't show up in the presentation that we had today. It is something that you see in our budget book or in our regular budget presentations. But if you do want information on that, we can, get some more information on that we can share with you.
And Ms. Karen, that is a request. One, where can we see the supports for parent engagement, and where are we showing investments in outreach to parents and getting disengaged youth reconnected? And I understand that's Roger Shaw's shop. Am I correct?
Yes, with regards to student re-engagement, there's maybe a gray area, I think, in your question in terms of like actual community engagement, which would probably take place under our communications and engagement office. So we might, want to get them involved, but we can follow up on that for you.
No, that was actually be Mr. Shaw. Who else? Any other persons that we need to talk to?
Our
just
community
Roger
engagement office.
Okay, community engagement. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Councilman Dorsey.
I'm good. No questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, but thank you, Melissa. I appreciate you getting the dumpster and all that worked out on Guilford.
Okay, I don't know if Councilman Slifer is still on call. Okay, well, we're gonna go over to Councilwoman Odette Ramos. Councilwoman Ramos. Councilman Conway. Ooh, okay. I guess that is, I mean, if anybody, we can just do one more round because a lot of the council people. Councilman Burnett, did you have one more question you want to ask, and then we can go through that committee again, and then we can recess?
I didn't have anything else. That was what I wanted to cover. What I wanted to ask about.
I have a question because of that $99 million cut, and we know it has not been approved yet because you're gonna get the Attorney General legal opinion. Can you tell us where that money would normally be going? Because if we look at a lot of the schools in the city, there is not just our young people grades and our dropout rates, but the maintenance on those particular schools. And I requested that any of the schools that are in danger of closing because of the maintenance, is any of that money allocated for maintenance of some of these old schools that we have here in the city? That $99, can you tell us what that money normally would be going?
You're muted, Courtney.
There we go. Can you guys hear me? Okay. I must have hit it by accident. I was saying this year, the comparison between this year and last year is a little different in terms of the funding formula. So it isn't really like a normal for this allocation. This would have been the first time we're receiving it. This allocation, though, it would have been unrestricted. So it would have been spread across all our different allocations. So it would have gone through schools, not based on any particular demographic information. So it wouldn't have been like, a poverty or gifted or EL weight. It would have been a weight that would have been distributed in the base funding. So it would have impacted all schools. And being able to lift up the base per pupil amount for all schools. So those dollars could have been spent on anything designated by the school as well as central office. So it's really broad in terms of how that 99 could be applied.
Mr. Chair, I think you're muted.
Thank you. I was just saying that Councilwoman McCray or Council Vice President have any questions before we recess.
I guess just to add to what you just mentioned, does that include, I guess, employees or staff, teachers at these closed schools? Do they move to other schools or are they let go? How does that process work?
With regards to our normal closing programs?
Yes.
Yeah, so when we close programs in the district, staff are reallocated based on need, based on where the students move to in most cases. So it's not directly a one-to-one, but we know that we have more staffing positions available than usually people to fill them. So there usually isn't an issue in terms of staff moving from closing schools to other available positions in other schools. And of course, when we have some schools who close down and student population shifts to other schools, there's greater need in those other schools as well for additional staff. So there's usually a transition based on that.
Does that same system apply to charter schools?
Yes, but less directly. In terms of wherever the student enrollment shifts to, the dollars move with the students, and in turn, positions are created based on the availability of dollars. So it's directly tied, to where students move to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Chair.
You're welcome. So I guess nobody have any more questions. So I want to thank Melissa Broom and North Avenue for your presentation. Thank the committee members, thank the council people who are on this call. And this particular oversight hearing is in recess. And everybody have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too, sir.